So welcome back. I'm pleased to introduce the moderator, Mark Weatherford. He's the Chief Cybersecurity Strategist at Coalfire, and he'll be leading this panel discussion, International Correlation in Cybersecurity. So joining Mark will be Majed Al-Salamah and Paco. So I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much. Come on, So, as we know, and I know it's a cliche, cybersecurity has no borders. What we're going to talk about today is the collaboration and information sharing across borders. This is becoming increasingly important in this global world as we continue to have more threat and vulnerability information sharing across borders, and putting the kind of policies and procedures in place that allow that to happen more efficiently is really a struggle right now globally. You know, there's no one country or one organization that has the keys to the kingdom on that. So my esteemed panel here today, we're going to talk about that. We have well, I'll let you go ahead and, Majed, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and a little bit about.
Well, thank you very much, Mark, for the introduction. And it really is a pleasure to be here with you, with my colleague Paco, and the audience talking about this very important topic. Collaboration in cybersecurity is really important. I mean, if you think about cybersecurity, it really is a broad, dealing with cybersecurity is a broad challenge that has multiple stakeholders. I like to think about this in economic terms. So if we think of the cybersecurity as a market, or we have multiple market players like the public sector, the regulators, the private sector, and of course, all of the supply chain along the private sector. You've got technology providers actually introducing solutions to the market, cybersecurity service providers, and if you think of the market, there are also an important market player are the threat actors that are just causing havoc. So in this cybersecurity market per se, we can think of this market as an inefficient market. And this market is naturally, what it's doing right now and today is there are negative externalities. And these externalities are causing impact to society in the form of cyber threats that are manifesting themselves, affecting the market players and the positive market players. So I'm really, really interested in this topic of collaboration because what we want is the key positive market players to introduce positive change, influence the market in a way where we can eliminate this impact in society, and I'm happy to discuss this further today.
Francisco Luis.
Thank you so much for being here. My name is Francisco Luis. I work for the company IriusRisk, a Spanish company, small company, but global business. And I'd like to start talking about something about the Majed introduced, but we come from from the 80s, 90s, when attackers, they performed the attacks alone. With the motivation was just for curiosity. They try to attack systems to get notice, to get public recognition. But the evolution of the cyber criminal organizations are going and improving every day their tactics and techniques and procedures. So we come from the Kevin Mitnick ages that everyone knows about Kevin Mitnick and what is happening in the 80s, and to the situation where attackers are doing a kind of digital transformation and incorporating a very sophisticated business strategies. So they are incorporating, for instance, money laundering, third parties to hire physical protection. They are asking for phishers, third-party phishers. They are renting botnet farms. And the problem is the focus that we are protecting and defending our environment is thinking as a protection, thinking just with the point of I need to protect a very large environment with a very limited resources, but the attackers has a limited resources, illimited. And the question is, in this situation, the only way to try to improve the resources is sharing. The only way to try to get any point of protection is the collaboration between different organizations. We are talking a global organization. We are talking about a global environment where different companies, different countries, different standards. So I think this conference or this panel could give you some information about how we could collaborate and how could improve our reactions in the future.
Great. So, Francisco Luis, I'll start with you. I think it was Dmitry Alperovich who coined the phrase, it's not if, but when you get attacked. From that context, can you talk about how the current criminal organizations are operating in this global schema that you just described?
Yeah. Everyone is aware about the ransomware organizations, for instance. Ransomware organizations in the past, when they start to do the spread of the malware, they use their own infrastructures. They have their own servers to drop the files. So that is completely different now. So, for instance, the way that someone wants to distribute malware on the targets is just renting the services to someone that the scope of that organization is just the development of the malware. The other companies are doing the compromise of some legitimate sites to put the malicious files and to download the files, the dropper sites. So the criminal organizations are very, very complex nowadays. And the problematic is we continue using very legacy ways to do the analysis of forensics. For instance, we continue using the cyber kill chain models. We are using just thinking about the attacks are performed because someone is facing the victims by a phishing. I can tell you that in a deep analysis of command and control logs that I have the opportunity to evaluate in my past, I can tell you that many companies that are already infected, they are members of a botnet that they have no idea because it's not bringing some fireworks to see that they are compromised. These botnets are renting to the real attackers. For instance, TrickBot is compromising thousands of systems in the past. They rented to Emotet gang. Emotet gang reinfect the qualified targets, and after that, these targets were encrypted. But the forensic analyst is thinking about that this is coming because someone opened a phishing message. They are completely wrong. They opened the phishing message in the very early stage, probably 2 years before, because they received the message from TrickBot. But the attack is performed by Emotet. Yep. This is how it's more complex than just a kill chain. It's multi-instantiated. It's in the same time, the attacks are multi-instantiated and are executed in parallel. Very common, very often.
So, great answer there. So, Majed, Saudi Aramco is a global organization, but you also work with a number of other organizations. How are you seeing organizations react to this evolving threat?
Well, it's an ongoing challenge, actually. So I would like to think of it as the cybersecurity discipline in itself is evolving. It's becoming its own discipline outright. It's got its subfields. You've got individual components and functions of cybersecurity have been maturing a lot over the years. I mean, I've spent about 19 years between IT and cybersecurity, and I've watched the evolution of the different functions. So if you think of just the core cybersecurity operations evolving from something that is reactive, that's event-based, so we have an alert, let's respond to it, to something that is more proactive and driven by intelligence. And now along trying to push towards being predictive and using the data and using AI as tools to actually enhance detection capability. And organizations themselves are finding a lot of value because the heart of security operations right now is intelligence-driven defense. And when we think of intelligence, it's not only companies doing it on their own, they're realizing that there's value with intelligence sharing. So even though the concept of intelligence sharing is not new, I think it was more than a couple of decades ago where the U.S. Presidential decision was to push critical infrastructure to set up their own ISACs and information sharings, per sector. But it really hasn't been pushing, I think, in advance or really developing until the last decade, when we've taken advantage of things like the cyber intelligence community adopting STICs and TAXI as protocols, or technology providers providing tips to really institutionalize threat intelligence within the cybersecurity operations. So definitely there's huge value in intelligence sharing. As a company, a lot of companies are doing this. They're setting up cyber threat intelligence agreements, either bilateral agreements or multilateral agreements with others. So, but the key point here I want to mention, it's not just about threat intelligence sharing. Communities are not mutually exclusive, and they don't all have to be large. It could be these just two organizations or a few organizations within the same sector. And we found this in the energy sector on national level, or the energy sector at a regional GCC level. We found immense value in sharing intelligence that is relevant, but also building the teams. And so it's definitely evolving. It's an evolving landscape.
Yeah. So Francisco Luis, back to our main theme of no borders. No borders means no regulations, means no limits, means that it's a free-for-all out there. So, thinking about, if the audience is out here, if they could take away one or two or three nuggets of things, how can we become more effective in identifying solutions, implementing solutions, and reporting, following these things? I mean, the previous presentation on Charlotte AI from CrowdStrike was pretty mind-blowing. I don't know if anyone was in for that, but I think that's the future. So talk a little bit about that, about some potential solutions.
Okay. Yes, for me it's critical in order to have a way to share information and to try to get to win the war, or just say, is develop standards, to integrate standards by the governments. So for me, for instance, it's nonsense to have this vendor is generating a forensic analysis, that this analysis is going to be distributed and shared with another company, and the paper is going to support everything. So the forensic analysis is going to miss different steps of the attack, and it's going to be shared with another one that is going to lose information, and it's going to be difficult to do the cross-border collaboration because there is no standard way to share that information. If we are talking about defensive actions or protection actions or playbooks, it's very difficult to start sharing playbooks. If we are talking about previous vendors presenting in the conference, their playbooks are not vendor agnostic. So how can you share the playbook between this vendor to the other vendor if the applications are not using the common language? Mm-hmm. So in my part-time, I work for the European Cybersecurity Agency, and we are building a kind of draft document that is going to be published in the next months about how we could share these cybersecurity playbooks. What is the state of the art of the cybersecurity playbooks? So we consider that the playbooks could have two different points of view. One of them is the human readable. So how can I do the analysis of the playbook in a visual notation? For that, we are using the ISO 19510, is the BPNN standard language. In the other side, we have the machine readable language. So how can we talk from one system to the other system using a common structurized language? So in that point, our trend, the language that we are using is Cacao framework from Oasis Open. So with both languages, we could say that we are working in the right way, or we could work in the right way to do a cross-border collaboration between all the different European countries if everyone talk Cacao as a standard structurized language and VPNN as a standard visual representation.
Okay, so Majed, so we've talking about what we can do to protect our organizations. What can we do to add to the global collective? How can we work together better to share information that benefits everybody?
Well, So there are a lot of different, of course, players in the market. So I'll give a perspective from large organizations and what large organizations can do. Organizations can actually play a leading role in improving cybersecurity for the collective. Every organization has hundreds, maybe thousands of suppliers. So if we think of supply chain cybersecurity, there's a leading role that these organizations can adopt. So think of that as organizations engage in business with each other. There's often a disparity in the level of cybersecurity between organizations.
Yep.
And think of one organization that can have its data processed by a third party, and that third party could be hosting that with a fourth party, and let's assume that fourth party suffers a data breach, or it's a cloud provider and it's affected. That has a negative ripple effect that can impact not one but many organizations. So what we want to do is we want to actually have a counter, a positive effect. And with that, what we want to do is establish, let's say, norms and establish expectations for what companies want from others they engage in business with. As you know, sometimes cybersecurity consequences don't manifest themselves immediately during the initial business engagement. They manifest themselves later. So often you have to put cybersecurity controls in order to do business, like it's the same contracts. We've had a positive experience with our third-party cybersecurity program, our supply chain cybersecurity program, where we actually mandate certain controls, about 90+ controls, depending on the type of the third party or the type of supplier, whether they're connected, whether they're a cloud provider or others. And some of these controls will be applicable to the different types of these suppliers. And in turn, what we want to do is apply a risk-based approach so that you don't treat all cybersecurity, or all suppliers the same way. You want to protect in the degree in which there's a risk. Yeah. And with this ecosystem of supply chain, we found that it's been extremely valuable. And what we do is we have a certification program where we ask the suppliers to recertify themselves with trusted audit firms. So large organizations can also help put these requirements to audit firms, so that they're maybe authorized to do such assessments. And that's, again, influencing positive change across the ecosystem. And so I think in essence, really, is you want to play a leading role. And we don't have to wait until the regulation is adapted or regulation is tweaked. Large organizations can help push that envelope and even influence these regulations. So this is what I mean by market forces, in that organizations can actually play a hand in the market and actually force positive change back down the supply chain and improve the general resilience for the entire market.
I'm really glad to hear you say it like that, because as a large organization, you have much more influence over how we can push that than small, medium-sized businesses. They just don't have the market forces to be able to do that. So, one of the things that we always talk about, what we should be doing to protect our organizations and what we want to do, what kind of tools and services we want to provide. But we often forget the bad guys get a vote. The bad guys get to use the same tools we do. So no talk would be legitimate these days without discussing AI. So Francisco Luis, how should we be thinking about responding to AI-based cyber threats and intelligent attacks?
Okay. I would see I'm going to compare from the attacker's perspective to the defense people. So it's just to keep in mind. So we have seen previous presentations in this Barcelona Cybersecurity Congress about how attackers are going to use the artificial intelligence. The question is, this is they started long time ago. So the Goitian is something that was an artificial intelligence attack that I presented in 2018. So I'm talking about 6 years ago, in 2018, Goitian. So it now looks like a trend. Everyone is talking about this sexy word, artificial intelligence introduced everywhere. But the problems that we are facing, for me, from my point of view as in the SOC, is we are going to receive a massive amount of false positives attacks. So this is going to generate alert fatigue. So you have nice systems, you have a very nice team, but it's going to get overloaded if you are not integrated in the artificial intelligence to clean up all this large amount of false positives. So this is going to be a consequence of the introduce of the artificial intelligence on automated attack. So for me, this is one of a very crucial point. About the development of source code, or if they try to hijack some people, that try to emulate some people, that could be, this is something that is already executed. In the positive thing about artificial intelligence, we need to test our environment. We need to evaluate if the return of investment that we are doing on cybersecurity is correct or not. So I consider artificial intelligence could allow us to perform automated attacks. So these automated attacks returning to the playbooks and the projects that I'm working, as I mentioned before, could allow us to see how the attack is executed, what could be our weakest points, what are our TTPs that are more possible to be exploited in our environment. So I think artificial intelligence is going to be a good friend, but it's also someone to keep an eye on it, because your enemy is going to be very close also to that tool.
Yep. So Majed, let's stay on this AI theme here. How do you think organizations can be effective in implementing solutions, defensive AI solutions? How are you guys doing it at your organization?
It's an ongoing challenge, but an ongoing opportunity. I mean, I agree with Paco here that it may be the only way out of getting out of alert fatigue, and it's the only way to scale cybersecurity operations realistically. So adopting AI is absolutely imperative. The question is, how can you adopt it effectively? You can't just take AI and say, all right, I'm going to install something AI box as if it's like a firewall or an endpoint agent or something like that. And that has its limitations. Now we see a lot of products in the market that are putting and slapping AI on top of solutions, and that does provide value to a certain extent. But when you think about the attacker's perspectives, attacks can span a vast digital footprint, and as cybersecurity operations, you need to have that visibility. You need to be able to correlate. So if you really want to adopt effective AI, the underlying challenge to overcome is really having this underlying data architecture that's really the core of all of these solutions. And thankfully, we see the market moving in this direction. We've seen some presentations here, and we're following the market, and we see that a lot of solutions now are rethinking to have AI data at the core to be able to establish AI, and then the solutions on top of that converging, whether it's a SOAR or an XDR or a SIM or anything like that. But the absolute foundation of really building effective AI is that data architecture, and I think that's going to be something. It's something exciting that we're following closely.
So let's go back to kind of the main theme of information sharing. So Francisco Luis, how can governments, and every country and every region is kind of responding in different ways from a regulatory perspective. How can governments encourage better cybersecurity information sharing in the context of this growing regulatory environment?
It's a good question. The question is, the knowledge is the power. So if we are talking about how can we request private sector that is having the most important or most of the most important information, and we ask them to share with their competitors, share with governments without getting any profit, because they are working for profit, how can you do that? For instance, if we are working about playbooks development, the business, the companies, the MSSPs that has this knowledge are getting some competitive advantage in the market. So you are asking them to share for free. So it's crucial for the governments that they generate some policies to compensate this information sharing. They need to have some advantages for this participating in this.
Incentivize it.
Exactly. Participating in these programs that if they share some information, they would get some compensation. So this is, I think, is the only way. They need to get paid for that.
Yeah. So same question, Majed. You know, how can we foster better international information sharing?
Well, first off, I agree with my colleague here is that there needs to be incentives. But I want to add an element to it as well as fundamentally, this is the challenge in information sharing is a challenge of trust. And underneath this challenge of trust is really people-to-people interactions. So I can't emphasize enough the importance of building people-to-people relationships. So it's one thing to say I've joined an information sharing organization and then nobody meets each other. It's another thing to actually either establish a smaller organization or join the bigger organizations and actually engage with people to establish that one-to-one trust. I mean, in the information sharing circles that we've had positive experience where after multiple, let's say, a few years, we've seen that the sharing has actually grown as the trust has developed, as people work together with each other, as they've done joint drills together. And humans have a natural inclination to help each other. So with this, I can share maybe a brief experience is that we had we've seen some intelligence that we thought was relevant to one of our peers. And of course, we respect the TLP protocol being Amber. We didn't share it immediately. We asked permission from the intelligence providers. We got that permission and shared it, and it was well received. And naturally, individuals at the core will want to reciprocate, and they'd want to share, as well. So I think I agree that there's needs to be incentives, but the people-to-people is absolutely crucial.
Yeah, I think that's a great point in that the governments can put all the protocols in place for information sharing, but if there's not the trust at the individual, the relationship level, it's probably not going to go very far. So we have exactly 2 minutes. Francisco Luis, 1 minute for closing comments.
Okay, I don't know if you want to ask some questions or this is the...
Let's go ahead and go with closing comments. We don't really have time for questions.
Okay, so
anyway.
From my point of view is we have the right standards, we have the right knowledge, we are going in the right direction, but many legacy concepts, the people need to think about more than the attacker perspective than the defensive point of view. So you need to have someone with a deep knowledge in attack. So you need to hire hackers with this point of view.
Hack yourself.
Yeah, hack everything. Yeah.
As closing comments, I just want to re-emphasize the people-to-people relationships, and conferences such as this are, very important to help establish that. Beyond that, AI is an absolute. AI is here to stay, and it's here to help us scale. And finally, I think I would ask everyone to always look at the technology is important, the standards are important, but take a look at the big picture, and take a look at the forces and see what part you can play or your organizations can play to drive these market forces in a positive way to shape a better cybersecurity landscape for everyone.
Thank you. Please join me in thanking our panelists here.